West Asia is on the brink. Israeli fighter jets struck at Iran on the 28th of October. The region is bracing for possible Iranian retaliation. Israel's military chief, Lieutenant General Herzi Halevi, has just warned Iran that if it strikes at Israel, we will hit places we spared this time. And today we're going to discuss the contours of a rivalry that many of our viewers in India will find curious and baffling. Now, Israel is a country that's 1,000 kilometers away from Iran. Yet Tehran strangely regards Israel as an existential threat. Now, this enmity is at the heart of the current wave of violence in West Asia. And it also explains the multi-front proxy wars that Israel has been fighting since October 7th, 2023. How did this enmity begin? What lies ahead for the region? And most importantly, when will this war end? I have with me in the studio today two of Israel's topmost security analysts, Caris Vitti and Brigadier General Eran Ortel, retired. Welcome to the News9 Plus show.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
You know, Caris, just a year ago, we watched our screens in horror at what was unfolding around the Gaza Strip. And today, here we are, where Israel is at war with Iran. Did you actually anticipate this war taking this long, almost a year, more than a year, and turning into this direct confrontation between Iran, that's a country that's 1,000 kilometers away from Israel?
At the time, we did not expect that the war would last for as long as it did, because in the beginning, it took time for us to internalize what was really happening. And I think, like many people, we looked at it as a conflict between the Palestinians and the Israelis, yet we were wrong. And we did believe that Israel would eventually put an end to the military machine of Hamas, and it would become a guerrilla group that we would need to address. And that has developed. But the fact that we are at war with Iran, and that was always the case, only for us, in not military sector of Israel, that took time to understand.
Right, and here we are a year later, where Israel is facing off with a country that's infinitely bigger than its own borders. And you know, as I was explaining to colleagues, that to understand this rivalry, you have to look at it from an Indian perspective. It would be the equivalent of a Southeast Asian country picking up a fight with India and using non-state actors in the Maldives, Sri Lanka and Bangladesh to fire ballistic missiles on India's territory. And this is what Israel has literally been fighting over the last year. Proxy actors that are fronts for Iran. And Brigadier General Eran, I have to ask you this. What are Iran's principal motivations in doing what it did with this ring of proxy actors that it's surrounded Israel with over the last couple of years?
So I think Iran has both an imperial state of mind and also a religious radical state of mind.
Right.
And because of these two state of minds, it is seeking to be an hegemonious power in the region.
Right.
Now, its real fight is with the Sunni Islam.
Right.
But I think very early on, from the Islamic Revolution, they have figured that Israel is going to be the one obstacle really standing in the way to fulfill this vision. So Israel was at the focal point from the very beginning, even as they were fighting the Iraqi-Iranian war in the 80s.
Yes.
They were already investing in Hezbollah in South Lebanon.
Right.
And as Caris has mentioned, I think Israel has failed to realize completely that what we thought was a slow decline of the Arab-Israeli conflict was really the starting increase of an Iranian push towards Israel.
Right. So the Sunni Arab world has kind of made peace with Israel, as the Abraham Accords seem to indicate. But Shia Iran is not on board yet, and it's not reconciled to this fact. And as you mentioned, over the last 4 decades has pursued this conflict with Israel. And for viewers to understand this rivalry again, Israel is the size of the Indian state of Manipur. And Iran is a country bigger than the 6 biggest Indian states put together. Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra, Uttar Pradesh, Gujarat, and Karnataka. Talk about David and Goliath. And here you have Iran and Israel again on the brink. But what is the long-term strategy, Caris? We keep hearing this, is Iran's first attacked Israel directly with that a swarm of ballistic missiles on the 1st of October. Israel has struck back, and now there's possible, another wave of attacks, possibly from Iran. When does all of this end, really? This kind of this bizarre conflict.
Well, I do think that I would defer that to the Brigadier General, but I will say that Israel's focus has to be on its own security, despite what you said about David and Goliath. We are portrayed as the Goliath. And I think that takes place in the global media. The Palestinian messaging that goes out makes us look like the Goliath. But at the end of the day, your characterization is the reality. We are a tiny country spanning a very limited space without even room to create buffer zones between us and the Palestinians in Gaza. So we must have a very smart strategy, and for that I'll leave it to the Brigadier General to explain.
The smart strategy, Brigadier General Iran, what would it be? What would it involve, really? I mean, I was in Israel last month, and we heard a phrase, regime change, that would be the only solution to the crisis that Israel is really facing at the moment. How realistic is the prospect of a regime change in Tehran that would actually bring peace between Iran and Israel? Because as I understand it, you don't have any enmity with the people of Iran. You've had excellent relations in the past, in the 70s. How could things change now?
Well, that is a good question. I would say that regime change is not a strategy, but a foreseeable future.
Right.
So Israel cannot be the one pushing for regime change in Iran. As you said, Israel is the David of the neighborhood, and quite an unexpected or unaccepted David in the neighborhood. So we really don't do influence. We don't do art and minds. We don't do regime change. All that Israel has ever hoped to do is to remove the immediate threats from our borders and live to fight another fight if needed. Now, regime change is sort of what we need to survive until that happens.
Right.
So the strategy is to remove the immediate threats from our borders. We've done that in Gaza with Hamas. There will be continuous operations to make sure that will not come up again. I don't know if this war will completely remove Hezbollah's threat from our north, but it is already a very weakened Hezbollah.
Right.
And the long-term strategy is to outlast the Iranian regime. That's what it means.
Right.
Eventually, I mean, the Americans did not want to have a direct war with the Soviet Union back in the Cold War.
Right.
What they've done is to contain the Soviet Union just enough time until it has collapsed from within.
Right. So that is going to be Israel's strategy with Iran as well. Outlast the Iranian
Outlast
regime.
the Iranian regime, not the Iranian people, of course.
Right, of course, with whom you have excellent contacts.
I think it's important to remember that Israel has 80,000 internal refugees. Our entire north has been evacuated and to a great extent destroyed by Hezbollah. And I made Aliyah. I moved from the United States to Israel 37 years ago.
Right.
And we have lived with this threat. I have 5 children, I have 4 grandchildren, I have an old mother, and we're all living under this threat that at any time Hezbollah can launch. It's a Damoclean sword over our head, 150,000 missiles coming at us, many of them precision missiles. The miracle has been that Israel has been able to neutralize a good portion of that threat. whether or not we have the political will,
Right.
because it seems we do have the military capability and the intelligence operational capability to do incredible damage to our sincere threats, do we have the political will to really put an end to that threat? And I think part of the factor that we must acknowledge is the United States and where the United States is going and who may be the leader of the United States and what kind of stand they will take with respect to Israel in this conflict. Because we are, the truth is, we are dependent. We're a tiny, tiny nation,
Right.
and we're dependent both on the United Nations veto, although the United Nations is now threatening to kick us out, and I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing, and of course the military support.
Karis, I have to quickly ask you a follow-on question to what you just said about the United States. Now, the US goes into an election less than a week from today. Trump or Kamala Harris, who's better for Israel?
In my opinion, Trump is better for Israel because we see that Kamala Harris's base is very much towards the left. The left has shown itself, as in Michigan, and also with respect to the hostages, the women hostages,
Yes.
we have been seen as non-people. We aren't
Right.
human in many ways, and we're treated that way by this sector of the population, which Kamala Harris will more and more need to appease or serve. And in my concern is that if she becomes the president and over time needs to cater more and more to that base, it will mean a bigger and bigger problem for Israel because of its dependence on the U.S.
Right. So a Trump presidency would be good for Israel, and especially when it comes to the hostages. Brigadier General, is that your view as well? Trump, Kamala Harris, who's better for?
Well, I would
Israel.
say that our number one priority
Yes.
is to regain our bipartisan stature
Right.
in the United States.
Yes.
So I would not like to answer that in a direct way. I would like for the next administration to make sure that Israel issue becomes really more widespread and seen and viewed
Right,
by the
rather than a
American people,
Democrat
rather
or
than
a Republican or a
Yes,
personality-based thing. I think that's a better way of looking at things, because the United States is, of course, a very trusted strategic partner for Israel. But there is the other question, Karis, that you were talking about the sword of Damocles. There's another sword that we don't talk about enough, that's in the basement that Iran is believed to have. That's the nuclear sword. How close is Iran really to nuclear weapons status? And what would be Israel's response if Iran declared itself to be a nuclear weapons state?
We're under with the understanding that they are weeks away from having nuclear military capability. And I think that Israel's position is that that can't happen. That final step can't happen, because once it does, the deterrence for any action is overwhelming. And so I think, and again, I defer to the Brigadier General, but I would say that this is an eventuality that is not an option for Israel.
An eventuality that's not an option for Israel. Brigadier General, you believe that a nuclear-armed Iran would be an absolute no-no for Israel? And would Israel then take certain steps to protect itself?
Well, for the first part of your question, Israel has been very clear at it. So the answer is yes, it's a big no-no. But I would take this question from another angle. I would analyze the current situation. What has happened in this war
Yes.
is that the Iranian strategy that was aimed to pushing out its influence and still avoid being in a direct war by this
Yes.
proxy
Right.
strategy, what Iran has really learned that not only that those proxies fail and collapse,
Right.
but they were actually dragged into a direct war with Israel,
Right.
counter to their own interests.
So the proxies haven't kind of served their purpose. They've actually dragged the state of Iran into conflict with Israel.
Exactly. So coming to your nuclear question point, if that is really what they will learn from this war,
Right.
then the question is what is going to be their alternative for the proxy war strategy.
Yes.
And one alternative, actually the only one that they see and I can see, is try to have a nuclear deterrence. That will come with a huge price.
Right.
That will not only put Israeli military option back on the table very soon, very concretely, that might, and by American statements, will bring finally the American military option to the table. And even if it doesn't, it sorts of corner Iran to a North Korean starter position.
An international pariah.
Yes, and Iran is not North Korea. It's a huge nation, 90 million people with a large middle class, industry, science.
Oil
they cannot
and gas.
afford that.
Yes.
So what have actually happened in this war, which I think the larger view, is that Iran has cornered itself to an impossible position.
Yes, and would you think, Karis, with that impossible situation that the Brigadier General mentioned, would it accelerate Iran's pursuit of nuclear weapons, or would it say that maybe the time is not right, we don't want to be North Korea?
Iran has shown itself to be more commonsensical than many might think, although it does seem to pursue a religious goal of Islamic leadership over the Sunnis, over the entire Islamic world and beyond. At the same time, it does have a practical approach, and I think it is aware that going that extra step could bring down the hounds of hell on Iran. And so what we may see is this tit for tat that Israel and Iran are now playing in an almost choreographed, although it's very dangerous and I don't mean to minimize that, but there is a certain theater to all of it, especially on the side of Iran, because it has to maintain its honor and its image of strength.
Right.
So it's hard to say where it might go.
You know, in Delhi last September, we concluded the IMEC corridor, which is a very radical trade and transport corridor across West Asia. We thought it was going to be built on a solid foundation of the Abraham Accords. Now, my question to you is, Brigadier General, were the October 7th attacks by Yahya Sinwar and Hamas, as we just discussed before the show, were they designed to disrupt the IMEC, or was it just a general mass casualty event directed at Israeli civilians? Was there something more to the 7th October attacks?
So Hamas strategy, as I understand it, is a mixture between an extreme radical religious visions and some strategic calculation. And we actually caught some of Sinwar's own papers.
Right.
And the thing is, Hamas was planning this move for at least a decade.
Right.
We were entering tunnels in 2014, and there were Nukhba motorcycles there aimed to go to Beersheba.
So they've been planning this operation for 10 years.
Yes, and so the question was not why do we go to that venture, but when.
Right.
And the one has to do with both the domestic politics crisis in Israel, with the Abraham Accord and coming normalization, which was mentioned in the papers, and many different things that the measurement of each of the calculations is hard to figure out.
Yes.
At the end of the day, they were going to go with it anyway, and they were actually doing that prematurely if you ask the Iranians and Hezbollah.
Right. You mean Hamas jumped the gun with the October 7th attacks on Israeli civilians?
Absolutely. And I think his partners from Lebanon and Iran were quite mad at him because he was actually ruining a coordinated move that could be way more dangerous for us.
So the death of Yahya Sinwar was 2 weeks back. We all saw it. The whole world saw it. And it's like it was possibly like the Osama Bin Laden death for the United States. There was a collective sigh of relief across the world. Do you think that changes things, the fact that the mastermind behind the October 7th attacks is finally dead, and you have actually seen him dead on television?
So Osama Bin Laden's as analogy is a good one, because Osama Bin Laden death was very significant,
Yeah.
and yet it is far from being an end for Islamic radical terrorism.
Right.
And that would be the case with Gaza.
Right.
He has a successor, which is happened to be his own brother, and Hamas remnants still put up, fights here and there.
Yes.
And so there's no other way to end terrorism but be very persistent about it.
Right. Persistent about it, which is what Israel has been certainly over the last couple of months. But Karis, what would Israel's immediate strategy be, apart from securing the release of the 101 hostages that are still unaccounted for? What would be your immediate goals, apart from Iran, fighting that big fight with Iran, in the near regions of Israel, when it comes to the northern part, which is with Hezbollah, and the southern part with Hamas? What would Israel's strategy be in the next couple of months?
I do want to stress that the conflict between Saudi Arabia and Iran is really at the heart of this.
The Shia-Sunni
yes,
fight.
represented by the
Right.
most powerful Sunni country, Saudi Arabia, that Saudi Arabia has continued to field the idea of normalization with Israel despite
Yes.
everything that has taken place. And despite, in the U.S. we've seen tremendous anti-Israel sentiment,
Yes.
but not coming as much from the leadership of Saudi Arabia. Of course, the leaders of the Sunni states, they have to acknowledge the interests of their people, but their own goals of Vision 2030 and a
Yes.
future for the Gulf and understanding where the world is going, Israel is the partner of choice. I believe also that considering the way the U.S. Vacillates in its commitment to supporting its allies, friends, and partners, including in the Gulf, that Israel is considered a hedge. And seeing Israel's tremendous successes over the last couple of months and being able to rebound from that terrible disaster that took place in October of 2023, the Sunni Arabs are watching, and they are saying to themselves, I believe, that having Israel as a partner is valuable. Should that progress, and I do believe that will be the strategy, strengthening the Abraham Accords, IMEC is going to happen.
Right.
It was delayed because of this, but it is good for India. It is good for every country in the
Yes.
Middle East. And you have powerful countries in Europe, including France, Greece, and Italy, competing for who will be the European side
Right.
of IMEC.
So, quick follow-on question: when will the war end then?
I think when the war ends, and again, I will defer to you, but a lot can happen before there's an end.
Right.
So operations may take place. Some people might think that we're still at war with Hamas. We're not.
Right.
That ended in the summer. If we don't completely neutralize Hezbollah,
Yes.
as I have learned from discussions with Iran, we will have to go back in and deal with this problem again in the coming, if not many months, then coming years.
Right, which is a phrase that some of the Israeli leaders use in the past, which is mowing the grass.
Which is definitely not the ideal approach.
Right.
And I hope that Iran's work on future war will be
Yes.
implemented so that we can put an end to this and really move on. But in the meantime,
Right.
I think there will be enough security in the region, and Israel will convey that kind of confidence and capability that we can move forward with our neighbors in a
Yes.
very productive way, and with the Indo-Pacific,
Right.
with countries of the Indo-Pacific, number one, India and
Yes.
Japan, in cooperation for the mutual benefit of all of us.
Right. So, Brigadier General, there's also, you're a military man, you were in the IDF. Now, there's a lot of concern in India about the civilian casualties that we've seen in the Gaza Strip during the operations of the last couple of months. We are hearing figures like 40,000 civilians killed, 41,000 civilians killed. That's raised a lot of concerns here. It seems to be excessive. What is the reason for such a large casualty toll? A, do you believe these numbers to be true? And B, was there any other way for the IDF to go about these operations?
So that's a very good question. So thank you for asking that. So I don't have any other figure. The figures you've mentioned are Hamas figures, are propaganda figures. They've been caught to be exaggerated in multiple times and events. But if we take 42,000, which is the last figure mentioned, you know, urban warfare is tragic, and it has severe consequences. And the only way to actually measure how bad it is to try to compare it to recent events.
Yes.
Take the Battle of Mosul.
Right.
The Battle of Mosul, for each one of the ISIS fighters who was considered to be dead there,
Yes.
there were anything between 4 to 7 local civilians killed with it. And that's the
Right.
Americans and the Iraqi government in their own population.
Right.
So if you take Hamas figures and the IDF figures, which I would say are much more reliable, we have identified 17,000 terrorists killed.
Hamas fighters.
Hamas fighters, identified
Right.
most of them by names.
Right.
17,000. So that goes to a ratio of 2 citizens for every 1 fighter. So that is actually
Right.
the best ratio in urban fighting. Mind you, Hamas is deliberately using the population as a human shield
Yes.
in a systemic way. So putting that in mind and putting in mind that Hamas has prepared Gaza, this dense populated urban terrain,
Yes.
for this fight for at least 15 years,
Right.
that is actually a very remarkable figure to the favor of the IDF and its professionalism and its discrimination between fighters and non-fighters.
Right.
Still, that is very tragic.
Right.
That is very bad.
Any loss of life is tragic, but thank you very much. I'm afraid we're completely out of time today, but thank you so much for illuminating our viewers with what's going on in West Asia right now and the road ahead to what we can believe is a permanent and lasting peace that the Abraham Accords could bring the region. Thank you very much, Caris.
Namaste.
Brigadier General. Namaste.
Namaste,
Happy Diwali.
Happy Diwali to you and your families. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much for joining us.
Thank you.